I've never been happy with the way that scope mounts. You have to use a reach forward mount, which makes it too high up, and it's never straight, it's never over the barrel, and you tend to get far too much height over the barrel, causing all sorts of significant problems. So, need to deal with it. I'm going to start off with a standard mount at the back. That's just the same as before. But I need to make a rail extension to extend the rail further out forwards over the barrel. That will then take another standard mount, so they can both be matched, they can both be the same. And the scope will magically appear. Now that software does generate a drawing to be able to make the things, but that's by far the most complicated part I've ever attempted to make, so I didn't do any video recording of that, just took a few pictures. Having made the rail, the next thing I wanted was a pair of matched mounts. So looking on Amazon, just ordered a pair of cheap Weaver rail mounts. They should have enough material on them to be able to machine down to the size that I want. So on the internet, order a pair of mounts. Very excited, they arrived. And it's just one. It's not in the box, it's not in the bag. 2 days later. What I'm doing here is putting both mounts over a 30mm diameter socket. So that will screw them both together so that I can machine them both at the same time and not take them apart until those operations are done. Putting them on the machine vise and getting them located dead center to the spindle of the machine. So everything's got to be done on the center line. For now, that groove doesn't give me anything other than a reference for the center line. I'll use that to machine the sides down, so the sides are dead center as well. Time to take all that excess material off the sides now. What I'm doing here is machining down each side to make sure that both sides are exactly the same thickness. That means that when I come to do the dovetail groove, I will know if that dovetail groove is in the center or not. The distance I'm aiming for here on this thickness is 5.5 millimeters. Comedy dimension. This is the last time I'm going to bring it back on center line with a dial indicator. I'll lock the table and zero another dial indicator to keep coming back to the center line from now on. That's the biggest end mill I've got, and it will just about reach all the way over both sides. So just touching it to find a face there, and then take it right the way down. This final height of the scope foot or base, that's pretty important because it's going to set the height of the scope once it's back on the rifle. I'm actually aiming for a dimension there of 17.09. Which is what it was. But a word about these over precise dimensions. I don't know anything at all about fits and clearances or tolerances, so I don't have any choice other than to reverse engineer things exactly as I measured them in the first place, which is a very tedious way to go about things. Something that needs to be done after most cuts, or certainly before you take any measurements, take all the burrs off. You don't want to take the burrs off too much though, otherwise the whole part just ends up looking like it's been filed instead of machined. And if you've ever had a metal splinter, this is how you get them. Well, I've opened out that slot just using a standard end mill. Put the dovetail end mill in there now, and I've got to get that down to another precise depth, which is going to be the depth of the dovetail groove. So just by using a 0.1 feeler there, getting it so that the cutter is 0.1 millimeters away from the surface, and then I'll know exactly how much I need to lower it. So knowing exactly where the cutter is in relation to the surface, I can now lower the cutter down to cut the groove at the depth that I want it to be, 2.69. So I'm going to go through with that dovetail cutter. It's at great risk of shattering, snagging, breaking, catching on the work, doing all sorts of things. So gently. Now, as machined, that dovetail is only 10 millimeters wide. It needs to be something like 13 millimeters wide. Well, the way I've measured it, it does. So what I've got to do is keep stepping side to side, taking small amounts off of each edge and then coming back to center, all the time trying to keep the groove centered, which is the reason for the whole project. Just on the right hand side you can see the stem of a dial indicator that I'm using to bring the work back on center after each cut. Now to measure the width of the groove, I've been using two 1.5mm drills. To clean out each groove, put a drill in each side. I'm holding them there with a little piece of silicone hose that's really playing no part other than keeping them there. But with two round pins in each groove you can measure the distance between the pins, and that will give you some comparison as to how much bigger you're making the dovetail groove. This is not easy to measure at all. Happy with the groove, I now needed to turn the pieces round. I've already drilled two holes in one piece and I've gone back to the other end to drill the other two holes. That wobbling device there is finding the edge of the work. So once I find the edge of the work I then need to move over a calculated amount, and that will put the hole exactly where I want the hole to be. So having drilled one hole, I now need to fiddle around with the DTI and then I'll move that across to drill the last hole. I need to move it across 11.8mm. And that will put the hole exactly where it's supposed to be. This is a 0.25mm feeler gauge. I can get that under the turret box of the scope, and that will eliminate any cant of the scope as well, because it will square it up exactly on the top of the rifle. Also, what I've got now, apart from a much more reliable arrangement, I've got a scope height that's only 4.4mm above the barrel. Previously it was 10.7. Happy with that. And not to forget those finishing touches that make all the difference.